United States in NCAA schools?
510,000.
How many transgender athletes are you aware of?
Less than 10.
Senator Dick Durbin yesterday during a U.S. Senate Judiciary Committee hearing on sports betting and college sports and the impact of it. But the conversation turned towards the issue of biological men competing in women's sports. And the issue of sports in general having several headlines outside of the actual, who's on the field and who won which game and so on. But policies around sports coming right here even to a state like Illinois. It's Illinois in Focus Daily. I'm Greg Bishop. Of course, we'll touch on some of the conversation out of that U.S. Senate Judiciary Committee from yesterday. But earlier this week, an Illinois House Committee held a hearing about the issue of public dollars for professional sports facilities. This has been a running issue for the past year and a half, if not 2 years, of, up in Chicago, are the Bears going to go to Arlington Heights? They bought some property there. They said, they're going to build this huge complex, and then there was property tax issues there. And then they came back and said, we want to build something on the lakefront. It's going to cost like $4.6 billion. We'll put in $2 billion of it. We're looking for some state tax dollars. You got the White Sox also looking for new facilities and possibly looking for state tax dollars as well. And a variety of other different types of sports facility updates that people are trying to find out how to make happen, but is there any appetite for tax dollars to be used in that? Well, a lot of the conversation is really focused on men's sports in Illinois. And earlier this week, the House Revenue and Finance Committee heard a legislator's proposal to, if there's going to be any consideration of tax dollars for sports facilities, then it shouldn't just be for men's sports. It should also be for women's sports. So here is a state representative that is talking about the bill that she has to bring about this equity in sports facility funding.
Thank you to members of the Revenue Committee for allowing me to come before you today and talk about House Bill 5841. I like to call this the equity amendment. And the reason that we use that terminology is because when we talk about professional women's sports teams, we don't always think about the history of how those women's sports teams have had to claw and fight to get to the point where they are today. And let's be honest, right now they're killing it. We have seen some amazing movement in this industry, watching people have excitement over women's professional sports. But for decades, women's professional sports teams have been forced to strive for that commercial success, but they've had to operate with bootstrapped infrastructure. I'm sure many of you will remember some of the coverage that we saw of the Women's World Cup and how they had subpar facilities. You see that in the Olympics as well, that they are not being treated in the same way that men's sports are. And so this is an attempt to try and right size and right some of those wrongs from the past. So over the past 50 years, publicly funded or subsidized stadiums have been the norm for men's professional sports franchises. 89% of teams in the 4 major U.S. professional sports leagues play in stadiums that have received taxpayer subsidies. Professional women's sports teams have received none, 0 public infrastructure support in Illinois. And when we talk about this particular legislation, I want to be very clear. It does not authorize any funding for any stadiums. This is essentially creating some equity when we talk about the possibility of providing any public support for any stadiums. So essentially what we do here, the Commission on Equity and Inclusion will prepare and submit an annual report to the General Assembly, evaluating whether the Illinois Sports Authority, or IFSA, has met the Commission and Authority's equity goals.
It's State Representative Eva Dina Delgado with her bill. And again, to stress, she says the bill does not free up any tax dollars here. It doesn't involve spending any tax dollars. It just simply says if tax dollars are going to be spent for sports facilities, then you got to get this Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Commission involved to make sure that it's equitable for women's sports as well. But to the idea of tax dollars being used for sports facilities in general, this is back from April. Governor J.B. Pritzker was asked about this, and he said he's a Bears fan, but he doesn't see any appetite for tax dollars to go to sports facilities at all.
The problem is that the offer that they've made just isn't one that I think the taxpayers are interested in getting engaged in. And I've said this before today, but I'll just repeat it, that if the Super Bowl champion Kansas City Chiefs can't get the people of their area to authorize the building of a new stadium, and we've seen this fail over and over across the United States, I don't really think that the people of Chicago or across Illinois feel any different than they do.
And House Speaker Emanuel Chris Welch was at that same event back in April of this year, being asked if there's any appetite for legislators to free up tax dollars for professional sports facilities like the Bears.
I'm going to say to you publicly what I said to Kevin Warren privately last week. If we were to put this issue on the board for a vote right now, it would fail, and it would fail miserably. There's no environment for something like this today. Now, in Springfield, environments change. Will that environment change within the next 30 days? I think that's highly unlikely. I think there's a whole lot of Chicago Bears fans in the General Assembly, but our priorities are pretty clear. And we, starting next week, have 1 month to pass another balanced budget.
And again, this was back in April of this year. So they didn't do anything with sports facilities. They didn't do anything fall veto session with sports facilities. Will they do anything in lame duck? He says it's not going to change in 30 days or so. That was back in April. Have things changed since, especially with the House committee looking at equity when it comes to sports funding. So will this go where it goes to the public taxpayer? I guess we'll watch and see. But not the only policy issue that made some headlines this week when it comes to sports. The issue of sports betting was the focus of a U.S. Senate Judiciary Committee yesterday, chaired by Senator Dick Durbin from Illinois. And the conversation steered away a little bit from sports betting in general to Republican Senator Marsha Blackburn talking about biological men in women's sports and having a collegiate official there to try to find out what they're doing to what she wants is to protect women's sports from men competing against them.
I am still disappointed that there is not an NCAA policy to protect women in competition. You all have had time to do this. Our female athletes deserve it. And if you're going to partner up on gambling and other things, and we applaud that, you have got to make certain that you are protecting women's sports for women. We hear about this every single week from female collegiate athletes and their concerns. You all have the ability to do better. It is important that you do better, and it is imperative that you protect opportunity for women in sports.
So the issue, obviously, something that women are approaching senators and legislators about. They want to make sure that biological men aren't competing against women in sports, be it high school and college and beyond. And the issue is important to certain groups. But Senator Dick Durbin seemed to downplay that a bit in his line of questioning with this NCAA official.
How many athletes are there in the United States in NCAA schools?
510,000.
How many transgender athletes are you aware of?
Less than 10.
Less than 10
Yep.
out of 510,000?
Yep.
So Durbin highlighting it's less than 10 of 510,000 of the collegiate athletes out there are transgender. So, they, I guess, shouldn't worry about those impacted by the 10 transgender athletes in the sports of the opposite sex. So their concerns being downplayed a bit there by Senator Dick Durbin. But obviously, still a lot of frustration. Missouri U.S. Senator Josh Hawley with his line of questioning about this particular issue.
And your guidelines say that biological men can go in and use the women's locker rooms if they want to. What the women want has nothing to do with it. They're not mentioned in here at all. Correct? Correct. It's right here. You just reaffirmed them in May of this year. I've got them. I'm reading them. I've got them off your website.
I believe our guidelines give people optionality with respect to how they choose to use their facilities. And many,
What does that even mean? Optionality. What it says is transgender student athletes will be able to use the locker room, shower, and toilet in accordance with their gender identity. That means men will be able to use the women's locker rooms. And as Riley Gaines and others have testified before this committee, that means if a man, a biological man, wants to use their locker room, they just have to accept it. Or else the women have to go somewhere else. They've got to go find an alternative. Why is that fair?
We told the local folks who've hosted our tournaments they need to create accommodations for the people who are playing.
You know, so it's the feds on the one hand, it's the locals on the other hand. The only person who doesn't seem to bear any responsibility in this is you and the NCAA, who are the governing body. And your testimony here today is you're not even subject to Title IX. Mr. Baker, I can't tell you how disappointed this makes me, but not just disappointed, frankly, infuriated for the student athletes who are suffering because of your policies, and you won't even defend them. You won't even take responsibility. It's outrageous. It's totally outrageous.
And we'll hear obviously a lot more about this and other issues as we continue forward here with Illinois in Focus Daily. I'm Greg Bishop. Like, subscribe, hit that notification bell. Wake up with us each and every weekday morning and get the headlines in your inbox with thecentersquare.com.